The Timothy Masters Story by Sean Fasanella. I'd like to begin by giving you a brief overview of what this presentation is about. Today I'm going to be covering the case involving a murder and a man known by the name of Tim Masters. First I'll be going over the setting and what happened. Then I'll cover the investigation and how it lasted over a period of 12 years and the trial. After that I'll talk about Dr. Hammond and who he was. Finally we'll talk about Masters' appeal and how he was wrongfully convicted of murder. It all started on the morning of February 11, 1987 when the body of a woman named Peggy Hetrick was discovered in a field in the small town of Fort Collins, Colorado. A man on a bicycle noticed the body when riding his bike to work that morning. He immediately called Fort Collins Police Department. Officer Linda Wheeler was the first one on the scene. She gave a description of the body. The body has just been discovered. The body was very clean to look at. There was no blood on the body. The body was actually so clean that the person who originally spotted it thought it was a mannequin. It quickly became obvious to investigators that this was more than just a murder. Her pants had been removed and her shirt was pulled up over her chest. A part of one of her breasts had been cut off, and she had been circumcised. She also had a deep stab wound in her back, which police believed to be the fatal wound. Officer Jim Broderick, who had a huge impact on the overall case, was also on the scene. Police had quickly identified their first suspect as Peggy's ex-boyfriend, Matt Zollner. They went to his house to question him. He said that he had seen her the night before at the local bar. He was on a date and Peggy didn't like it. She stormed out of the bar. He said he was on his date until about 3 a.m. The police crossed his story with the girl he was on a date with and it checked out. After they were able to rule out Matt Zollner, the police took to the local residences to see if anyone had seen anything. For Officer Wheeler, her first stop was the Masters' trailer home. Clyde Masters had lived there with his 15-year-old son, Tim. Their trailer was about 100 yards away from where the body was discovered. Tim had already left for school that morning, so Clyde was the only one home. Clyde said that his son usually cuts right through the field to catch the bus in the morning, but that morning, he had noticed something strange in the way Tim walked. Clyde said he had veered to the left as he was walking through the field, and had stopped for a few moments. Being that Tim never reported anything, he jumped his way to the top of the suspect list. Police rushed to Tim's high school and pulled him out of class and took him to the station for questioning. A long and intense interrogation began in which 5 investigators took turns pounding away at Tim. They kept saying things like, "We know you did it," and "You should just confess," but Tim didn't crack. He explained that he thought the body was just a mannequin and someone was pulling a mean prank on him because Tim's mom had died almost exactly 4 years earlier. Police didn't believe him. Meanwhile, back at the Masters' residence, Officer Broderick searched Tim's room for evidence. He found 7 hunting knives, one of which had a scalpel attached to it that could have been used to perform the circumcision. The knives were later tested and no blood was found on them. Broderick also looked in Tim's notebooks from school, which had a bunch of doodles in them, some of which were about killing and murder. Overall, they found nothing incriminating. Masters was released and everything seemed normal. But Fort Collins police still believed Masters had committed the murder and were determined to prove it. It was theorized that Masters had committed the murder in spite of his mother's death, and the anniversary of her death drove him to do it. So about a year later, a 92-man team was assigned to constantly watch Masters and try to find him doing something incriminating. Police would try things to act him on, such as leaving copies of his mother's obituary in his driveway. They even paid off a news reporter to write a fake news article about how his arrest was imminent. These practices were obviously unethical, as they were basically torturing this poor kid. Tim never cracked and the police never got anything. It was now 5 years after Hetrick's murder and life had moved on for Tim Masters. He had joined the Navy and was currently stationed on a boat in Philadelphia. One day, Officer Wheeler got new orders that were to see if you can put enough of the puzzle together to arrest Tim Masters. She investigated for a year before she finally found something. Apparently, Tim had told a friend that he knew that Peggy Hetrick was missing part of her breast. More specifically, he knew that her nipple had either been bitten off or cut off. This was a detail of the case Wheeler was sure the police had not told the public about. She and Broderick rushed to Philadelphia, where Masters was stationed at the time with an arrest warrant. They found Tim and questioned him. Tim told them that this information was not much of a secret as the police had asked for students to help in searching the field for body parts. Tim's story checked out. Wheeler was convinced that Tim Masters could not and had not committed the murder. Officer Wheeler quit the force in 1995. It was now a whopping 12 years after the murder, and Tim was living out in California. He had been honorably discharged from the Navy and was working full-time. Officer Broderick had been promoted to supervisor and had taken a turn for the worst. For some reason, Broderick was convinced Tim had done it and reopened the case. He had taken the copies of Tim's doodles from his notebook and went to see Dr. Reed Melloy. Dr. Melloy was an FBI profiler and was internationally known expert on sexual homicides. He took a look at the drawings and agreed with Broderick. He told Broderick that it looked to be a textbook sexual homicide. They got a warrant and went to California and arrested Tim. He was 27. The trial took place in March of 1999. The prosecutors were Terry Gilmore and Jolene Blair. The attorney representing Tim Masters was Eric Fisher. The trial was a difficult task for the prosecutors as they did not have any physical evidence linking Tim to the murder, just theories. Blair was quoted in an interview saying, "There were times when Terry and I were looking at each other like, oh, what are we doing? There's no way we're gonna prove this crime. We got nothing." But Blair then remembered, and that's when Broderick would say, "Wait a minute. Come on guys. This is what we needed to do and it was the right thing." And there was never any doubt in his mind. They went forward with the case. Their number one piece of evidence was Dr. Melloy's testimony, which should have been ruled out by the Daubert rules. At the end of the trial, the jury had found Tim guilty of first-degree murder and the judge had sentenced him to life in prison. Dr. Richard Hammond was a renowned eye doctor that lived down the street from where the Masters trailer was. 4 years before Tim was arrested, a college girl had been house-sitting for the doctor. When in the bathroom, she heard a noise that sounded funny to her coming from one of the vents. She discovered a video camera in the vent. She immediately called police and the house was searched. Police found a large videotaping system wired throughout the house and about $10,000 worth of pornography. It turns out that Dr. Hammond had been secretly videotaping women in his house for some time, specially positioning the cameras to catch certain areas of their bodies. After viewing the tapes, police counted a total of 78 victims that he recorded. Dr. Hammond was arrested and sent to a psychiatric unit until he was released on bail. Police found him 2 days later dead in a motel in Denver. He had stuck himself with an IV full of cyanide. A normal person would have thought that Dr. Hammond would have jumped to the top of the suspect list for the murder, as it was obviously a sexual murder. However, police did not find any videos of Peggy Hetrick, so they did not investigate the doctor. Just 6 months after Hammond's arrest, Broderick had the tapes destroyed as he claimed he did not want such personal videos getting viral. Dr. Hammond's situation was never brought to the attention of the defense before the trial. Tim Masters was finally granted appeal on his third try. The state had appointed attorney Maria Liu to his case in 2003. Liu did not have much experience and acquired help from fellow attorney David Wymore. On November 2007, a trial had begun to decide if Masters deserved a new trial. During the trial, a lot of unethical practices had come to light. It was discovered that Officer Broderick had been withholding a lot of information from both sides of the case. One piece of evidence was a discussion that Broderick had with another FBI profiler, Roy Hazelwood. Hazelwood had stated when he was asked if he agreed with Dr. Malloy, "No, these are just doodles and they don't reflect what happened to Peggy Hetrick." Broderick also didn't turn over Dr. Malloy's full 300-page report, which in it had notes stating that the circumcision cuts were surgical, which would suggest that a trained professional would have had to have made the cuts. During the trial, Broderick had kept walking over to a box and pulling out notes. Attorney Wymore at one point called out, "What is that box? And why is he pulling stuff out of that box and why don't I have it?" The judge agreed with Wymore, ordered that it be turned over. In the box were enhanced pictures of shoe prints which were classified as a brand called thumb cans. Tim Masters had never owned a pair of thumb cans. The new trial was granted. Tim's attorneys had concluded that there had to be DNA evidence on the Hetrick's clothes. This was not brought up during the original investigation as science had not advanced far enough for DNA analyses. They wanted to get it tested, but there was a problem. The only forensic analysts that could do it were in the Netherlands. Evidence had never been taken out of the US for testing before and it was a long shot. The judge decided that it was necessary and ordered it be taken for testing. Dr. Eikelenboom, or Drivey, was the man they had to go see. They went to his lab, known as the crime farm. Drivey was the only person in the world at the time who could pull DNA from skin cells left behind if a person had touched something a little too hard. He began by reenacting what they believed happened so that he knew where on the clothes to test. They found DNA right away on Hetrick's underwear. They tested it against Tim Masters' DNA and the test came back negative for a match. They didn't know who it belonged to, but they did know it was male. They also found DNA on the cuffs of her sleeves. A few days later, Drivey arrived in Colorado to testify in court. The test results were confirmed by a local crime lab and the judge ordered Tim Masters' immediate release on January 18, 2008. On January 22, all of the charges against Masters were dropped. Over the next 2 years, the county and the city of Fort Collins would pay Tim a total of $10 million as retribution for the mistake. Broderick was forced to resign and is being brought up on 9 counts of perjury for allegedly lying about evidence to the grand jury to obtain Masters' indictment. The case is currently on hold while the prosecution appeals a judge's order to drop 3 of the 9 counts of perjury. Tim blames Broderick alone for what happened and is suing him in civil court. They tested to see whose DNA was in fact on the inside of Peggy Hetrick's panties. Was it Dr. Richard Hammond's? Don't know. They didn't have a sample of his DNA to test it against and they wouldn't need it. Was it accidentally applied DNA from one of the officers working the case when they were holding the underwear? Nope. They tested multiple people and they all came back negative. So whose was it? Turns out, it was Matt Zollner's, the ex-boyfriend. So did he do it? There's no way of knowing if it was there by coincidence or if he committed the murder, so they can't be sure. The case eventually closed. Here are my sources. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you.